Hello and welcome to Analysis. I am Deji Badimasi. The just concluded Anambra Governorship election could be said to be a turning point for electoral process in the country. A few days to the poll, everyone was prepared for more or less war. The police deployed over 34,500 personnel, 45 commissioners of police, 48 ACPs, that's Assistant Commissioners of Police now, 2 DIGs, that's Deputy Inspector Generals of Police, and then 5 AIGs, that's Assistant Inspector Generals of Police, and 3 helicopters. I mean, you would think this was a war and not an election. Now, all of this is understandable because of the violence in that state now in the lead up to the election. But then on the day of the election, the scheduled process took place in over 5,000 polling units, 21 local government areas with 18 candidates in the race, thousands, of course, of election monitors and observers, with the international community watching. Now, during the process, the worst that was expected did not happen. As a matter of fact, very few incidents of intimidation, violence, and ballot snatching were reported. Although the process was earlier declared inconclusive because election did not take place in Ihiala local government area, but a supplementary election was later scheduled there, and that took place also peacefully. With 112,229 votes, former governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria and candidate of the All Progressives Grand Alliance, Chukwuma Soludo, that's Professor Chukwuma Soludo now, secured the mandate of the people of Anambra State. His closest rival and flag bearer of the People's Democratic Party, Valentine Ozigbo, trailed behind, while Andy Uba of the All Progressives Congress came third. Well, the election is still a big talking point in the country. And joining me now to discuss this further is Cynthia MBAMALU, who is the program manager of Yaga Africa, and CHUDE, who is a public affairs analyst. Cynthia joins us, by the way, from Abuja, and then we have a Chike in Lagos. Cynthia, let me start with you. Yaga Africa deployed hundreds of election observers or monitors. I don't know what you call them now, across the state. And is it a surprise to you that the election did not witness any kind of violence at all, as we had earlier feared?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, thank you, and it's good to be part of the discussions today. I think first is to say that one major success from the elections was the fact that the elections held. Because, you know, before the elections, like you rightly put it, there was a lot of fear because of the security threat. However, we saw the elections, it came and it is gone. And yes, I wouldn't say it was a total surprise because if you think about elections in Anambra State, there's in 2017, before the elections, there was that threat of insecurity also in the state. If you remember, there was a time the operation, I think it was Crocodile Smile or so, that was the before some month before the elections, and there was actually in that year a call for a sit at home, which was later called off. So we saw similar trend in these elections. However, the why it became more worrisome was because there were more violent attacks, be it the what we call popularly the unknown gunmen attacks, or the other issues around the separatist groups' demands. But by the week of the elections, 48 hours the elections, they had called off the sit-at-home order, and I think with the level of deployment, the elections, there was a lot of hope. There was a lot of hope in the state that perhaps with the deployment of security, we would have a more peaceful process. So in all of it, just following trends and engaging in the electoral process, I wouldn't say I was surprised that it was peaceful and we didn't have any major security issue. I would just say more or less that a lot of us are relieved and were pleased that we had a democratic process take charge, or rather we had a successful democratic process where voters, though few in their numbers, still came out to vote and elect their governor who would be in for the next 4 years.
And talking about the number of voters, because you just brought it up, very few. Achike, some people would say it's not a surprise that the turnout at the election was poor. In 2017, the turnout wasn't great at all. And I remember covering election in that state sometime in 2010 or so, during, I think, the second term of Peter Obi. And even before that, turnout during elections in Anambra State has never been great. But this time, of course, very poor. Just slightly over 10% of the registered voters actually voted this time. What exactly is the problem with Anambra State? Because this would appear to be beyond the issue of security.
Yeah, obviously it's beyond the issue of security. If this was a one-off thing, then you could say, okay, maybe security impacted on voter apathy. But the reality, just like you have said, is that Anambra has achieved a certain level of notoriety when it comes to low turnout during elections. Of course, it is also a Nigerian problem, but then that of Anambra State is particularly worrisome. And obviously, the insecurity issue contributed, but then without insecurity, what we'll be talking about, maybe an extra 5%, maybe 6%, which is still abysmal, or 10% maximum, which is still very abysmal. It just gives you an idea that a lot needs to be done with regards to political, education, with regards to the political consciousness of the people of Anambra State. Perhaps they have not made the connection between the choices they make during an election and what happens as a consequence of these choices. If they are able to make that connection, I want to believe that they will do much more. They will motivate themselves, they will mobilize themselves, and not wait for other outsiders to plead and beg them to do that. But let me just say something slightly about the insecurity, which you just talked about. The reality is that what happened in Anambra State was not a miracle. Of course, it was a miraculous situation because people expected the worst. But a lot of work was done by different organizations to ensure the peaceful outcome that we saw. Civil society groups were working, around the clock, trying to mobilize people, placing adverts on the media, especially on radio, to mobilize people to come out for that election. I know that I was embedded with the Nigeria Civil Society Situation Room, and then we went to Oka about 3 weeks before that election to also discuss with the various civil society groups in the entire Southeast over the same, importance of coming out to vote in the election and mobilizing the people. And after that, we went to Abuja. We had a meeting with the INEC Commissioner in Anambra State, who gave us, ideas about the challenges, of the election and how prepared they were. But beyond that, again, is the fact that so many other stakeholders in Anambra State, the elites, the churches, some of the church leaders and so on, were also making the right kind of statements about the need for the people to come out. And so, and then of course the discussions with the various groups. So if we owe the success of the peaceful election in Anambra State to also the deployment of security personnel and other activities that happened, perhaps in a paradoxical kind of way, we owe the success to some extent to even the separatist group or whichever other violent groups that have been active in Anambra State, because they had a choice to make during that election. It is not that they were cowed. The police or the security force were not in every hamlet in Anambra State. So if they wanted to cause some panic, they would have done that. 2, 3, 4 different places during the election proper, but they did not. So that means that people got to them. That means that they were persuaded by the argument of the people that, look, the consequences of not having this will be severe. And nobody in Anambra State might like exactly what will happen eventually. So all of these things contributed to the peaceful election we had.
All right. Cynthia, let me come back to you now. You look at that trend we talked about, the trend of low voter turnout during elections, especially in Anambra State. Would you attribute that now to maybe failure on the part of civil society groups, that they are not providing enough say political education now, voter enlightenment? As a matter of fact, INEC itself has a department that is dedicated to voter enlightenment. So you look at what civil society groups are supposed to do, civil society groups like yours, for instance, you look at what INEC is supposed to do, and even the participants, the politicians themselves, would you say they have failed over the years to actually carry the people along in terms of voter enlightenment now, so that the people understand why it's important for them to vote during elections?
Thank you. This is an important question because, like has already been mentioned, Anambra recorded barely 10.27% turnout. But Anambra in itself is a peculiar state when it comes to turnout. But I'll look at it from three broad categories. First, is the conversation around the quality of governance and its impact on the people. That's one arm of the conversation. The second is about the conscious effort to build a political culture that promotes democracy, and I think the third for me is the question around the process itself. And why do I think it's important to look at it from these three broad perspectives? Because it's beyond civil society. There's one thing that needs to stand out in Anambra is the fact that even when there were lots of fears, even when political parties had issues or were not conducting campaigns, civil society organizations went out in their numbers. Actually, I already mentioned that the civil society situation room, even Yaga Africa and other groups were in the states months before the elections, weeks the elections, canvassing for voters to turn out to vote. There were media engagements on radio, on television, specifically for voter education. I know we had run weekly programs for 3 months just getting people to turn out to vote. So but that's why I say it's not just civil society. So now, why the question about the quality of governance? There's a lot of challenge with the quality of governance, and voters are increasingly not seeing the need to vote, because to them, what is incentive to participate if governance is not getting to me, if I cannot feel the impact of government in my life? And I think that is an important conversation, because if we still have poor leadership or poor quality of leadership that is not meeting the needs of the average citizen, then it increasingly leads to the poor turnout in elections. Think about it, it's beyond just Anambra. Nationally, we're experiencing a decline in voter turnout because that incentive to participate is no longer. Then I think one important thing that needs to be done is to get our government to start to work. When people feel the dividends of democracy, then it increases that incentive to participate. The other thing is a conscious effort to build that democratic process, which is where I think is beyond just CSOs, because a lot of civil society organizations work around the clock, but political parties play an important role. And increasingly, parties are filling in that role of being that democratic institution that builds citizens' consciousness and ensures processes and functions are met. So what parties so far, just after elections, they go to bed. What they do is towards elections, they rather focus on getting monies to buy votes rather than promoting the quality of conversations, promoting issue-based campaigns, and even engaging the electorate after elections to hold institutions to be accountable. So there's a lot of role the parties need to play, because political parties and political leaders are currently failing in that role that they're required to play in a democratic process. And then the other part is the issues around the process and the system. And I think a lot of work has been invested to build our electoral process. And a lot of citizens need to also understand that if we do not vote, we are the ones who are the victims of our inability to come out to vote. Because the system is getting better, the process is getting better. Actually, our electoral process is getting better, and votes are beginning to count. So the next line is to build confidence in that electoral process, so that citizens understand that votes are counting. You need to come out to vote. And I think if we put all of this together, we'll begin to see progress in the quality of voter participation in the elections. And I think the last point is INEC. The Electoral Commission still has a lot of responsibility to inspire confidence by meeting its mandate. If it meets its mandate,
very good. Let me just pause you there, because we're going to talk about INEC. But let me just pause you there. We'll take a short break, and when we come back, we'll be talking about the performance of INEC in these elections. Did it live up to expectation? That's what we'll be talking about when we get back. So stay with us. Welcome back. If you just joined us, you're watching Analysis with me, Deji Badimasi, and today we're doing a review of the Anambra State Governorship election. And my guest on the program, Cynthia MBAMALU, who is the program manager of Yaga Africa, who's in Abuja, and of course I have CHUDE, who's a political affairs analyst. Chike, this election, the Anambra Governorship election, whether we like it or not, it was like INEC was also on trial, given what had happened before that election, especially when you look at the issues and arguments surrounding the transmission of election results and all of that, and the issue of the use of technology during elections, and even the issue of logistics that had always been INEC's nightmare right from when elections have been conducted in this country. I can't remember any election where in this country where INEC actually got it right when it comes to logistics and deploying to polling units early enough. So from what you saw in terms of INEC performance now, Achike, how would you rate INEC, especially when you consider the fact that you consider the failure rate, for instance, of the is it the BVAS machine now? I mean, it created a lot of problems.
Yeah, well, just like we're talking about the abysmal turnout of voters in Anambra State, regardless of even the current insecurity issue, it had been a pattern. And you had just, indicated as such that regardless of the same volatile situation in Anambra State, the issue of logistics has been a problem with INEC right from time. So it is also not a new thing. And obviously, INEC should be held accountable for its failures. I mean, for too long, in a way, we have tended to pamper INEC and dismiss some of their failures as just some of those things that happen. But after about 21 years or 22 years of unbroken democracy and the existence of the independent, National Electoral Commission, you would expect that in some areas where they have been weak, that they would have strengthened over the years as they notice the failures for each of the elections, that the very next time they would make rectification and also correct these issues. This obviously were not done. Looking at the peculiarity of the Anambra situation, I mean, I will look at two areas. You talked about the beavers. And some of the information we got is that not all the beaver machines that were deployed to the field were actually tested. I think they just assumed that they were going to be okay. So about as much as 400 of these machines were deployed to polling units.
Without being tested?
Yes, without any serious, test. And then obviously what we saw was a natural result of their inability to do what they had to do. Then there's also the issue of the PVCs, which a lot of people somehow surprisingly are not talking about. There were over 70%, I mean 70,000 new PVCs that were supposed to be deployed. You will think that, knowing that this was what they had at hand, that this PVC will be deployed on time. In fact, we're talking to a senior INEC person in one of the local governments around Oka, and he was saying that they got the PVCs about 4 days before the election, that it should have been ready, or they should have been ready about a month before the election. So obviously there was a lapse, obviously inefficiency somewhere. Now it's obvious that out of the 70,000, there is no way INEC would have been able to distribute as much as 5% to the people, especially given the climate. So that was a clear failure on the part of INEC. Whatever is responsible for that, perhaps when a post-mortem is done, INEC will be able to, explain that. So I mean, at that level, there were issues. There are also the good points. Really, the issue of logistics, fine, we can explain it away to some extent, because they said that they have been in a situation where, after mobilizing
the
drivers, overnight at the 11th hour, they just decided to abscond with the monies, and of course they did not turn up. But I was a little bit encouraged when we went to the INEC office on Thursday morning or so, and then in our presence, some of these, NURTW drivers began to come into the local government. There were so many, and I said, okay, fine. At least logistics issues will not be a major problem. Maybe in a few places they didn't turn up, but a lot of them turned up. But why sometimes it is difficult to even excuse some of these inefficiencies on the part of INEC? Look at Ihiala. After the main election, look, why is it that the security is beefed when you have off-cycle election? Because you have a lot of downtime for security personnel in the country. So it is easy to deploy a lot of them, as much as 30,000, 40,000, to places where they are having off-cycle election. Now that is supposed to bring some level of confidence and ensure safety. So the same way you could call the Ihiala election an off-cycle election, in a way. And so what that means is that you're now going to have a heavy deployment of INEC officials. You're going to have so many of them, ad hoc staff,
and yet
all
we
that,
saw
and security,
we
who
saw
were already on
deployment
ground.
done very
But
late.
we also saw what happened in Ihiala. Many of the polling stations from the reports we are having, polling units, started operations around, about 2 hours after the election was supposed to have kicked in. How do you explain that? So obviously there are some things that are not working with regards to INEC, and the sooner they do something about it, the better for everybody. Nigerians helped them with the transmission of results, which they wanted badly to do, which of course a lot of us believe is the right way to go. But of course you can see the outcry, and so we don't want, when Nigerians have invested so much in trying to help INEC or prop them up in certain areas, that we have these issues. We have taken too much or accepted too much excuses from INEC. It is time that they begin to walk the talk.
So Cynthia, let me ask you this. With the performance of the beavers and the performance of INEC generally, do you think it's likely to call to question INEC's capacity to transmit results electronically? Because just before this election, INEC, of course, got the approval to do electronic transmission of results. And you know the kind of debate that trailed that process. But with what we saw during the Anambra governorship election, you would say that doesn't inspire confidence at all?
I think first it's important to understand what the beaver serves to achieve and to assess it from each of its functionality. So the beavers in itself is a device that integrates different aspects. So it's first deployed at the point of registration of voters, because it integrates the IVED, which is the INEC voter enrollment device. And we saw that it was used successfully to register voters. Now on elections day, it serves two functions: to accredit voters and to transmit results. Now, where we observed a lot of challenges was with respect to accrediting voters. So the issues around authentication of voters, which basically were largely an issue of issues around configuration of data, polling data, software issues, and the fact that some of them were not tested. So those are issues that you can see that if there was proper oversight, those issues would be easily avoided. And then the second part, which the beavers is used for, is results upload on the INEX results portal. And we had observed that, and we saw that as by midnight, almost 80% of the polling unit level results were uploaded. Especially considering the fact that not every polling unit had elections, so because Ihiala obviously was out. So if you could see almost 44,000 of polling unit level results uploaded, you can actually say that the beavers did function reasonably well when it came to uploading results. So why did I want to break this down into the three important functions of the beavers? It's because it's important we understand the technology itself before giving into issues around criticism. What is important now is to call on the Electoral Commission to review its processes, its personnel, and its systems. Because first, issues around the beavers were issues that would have been resolved if there was proper oversight, if the right updates, software updates were done when they were supposed to be done, if all machines were tested before they were deployed, we wouldn't have had these issues. And from our data, actually, in 95% of polling units, the beavers was used all through the day. However, of these 95%, we had about 39% of the polling units where the beavers had to be fixed, they malfunctioned and had to be fixed. But they were fixed, just that they delayed the process. So they still functioned, just that they delayed the process. In fact, it was only in about 3% of the polling units where the beavers were deployed that they were not fixed, and the officials resorted to manual accreditation. So what is this data showing? That yes, it malfunctioned during the day, but it was fixed at some point and it was used subsequently. It's just that it caused a huge delay. So the technology in itself is not the challenge. The fact that INEC had said they are ready to deploy technology was not a lie. However, where the fault was the fact that the commission did not carry a due diligence in ensuring that
that is absolutely important. I mean, everybody wants technology, but you just have to make sure you do everything you have to do to ensure everything works smoothly. Because when you give room for doubts, you know, even the politicians themselves may want to take advantage to use that now to, if you like, for want of a better word, now rubbish the entire electoral process. Yeah. But then, but very quickly, because we're rounding up now, very quickly, Cynthia, you want to give INEC a score. How would you score INEC? I mean, in terms of performance, on a score of 100, what would you give INEC?
That would be a difficult thing to respond to, because you look at it was not a single process. So I would say I wouldn't use a score. I would say it was a fair performance, and that there are rooms for improvement, and INEC should leverage on the learnings from Anambra for the next elections that will be coming up in Ekiti and Osun. Yeah, absolutely, because those elections too are very important. People will be looking forward to the Osun governorship election now to see how INEC handles that. Achike, a final word from you.
Yes, well, you know, technology has been the politician's nightmare. If you remember, when the former INEC chairman was leaving, he was quite bitter about the performances of the political elites and held them responsible for the disrepute of you know, the elections in Nigeria. You know, and so with technology, somehow you're able to deal you know, a mortal blow to the inordinate ambitions of some of these politicians. So
would you say to some extent that technology made a fundamental difference in
No, it does because it takes some initiative, unwholesome initiative away from the politicians. And now, I mean, they do not need to employ thugs and miscreants, for instance, to snatch the ballot box. In most cases, it's not going to help them. You understand? And then, of course, they're also not going to spend so much money on such a, you know, social deviance to cause problem within the electoral process and all that. So I think it's a good thing. The only thing is that we need to ensure that the technology is kept safe. Yeah, of course, people will talk about hacking and all that. These are some of the vulnerabilities of technology. But if we do our part well, if the Commission does its part well, it will keep the process safe.
All right. All right. Cynthia MBAMALU, Program Manager now for YAGA Africa. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for your contributions. And of course, Achike CHUDE, thank you very much, as always, for coming on the program. Well, that's how much you can take on the program this week. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.